Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back again with me, Mr. Naufal, and today we will learn about chemistry. And our topic today is about element and also compounds. So, yeah, I think have you guys ever heard about elements and also compounds? So, I know this is very new for all of you because this is very fundamental one. So, before we go deep to the chemistry, you need to learn first about the element and also compounds. So yeah, please keep the attention to the presentation and also to my voice, okay? So before we go to the first slide, I will begin this presentation with the question here, okay? So I'm sorry. Okay. So we begin with the question here. So what is the universe are made up? So I think all of you have think about so what kind of substance that can build up the universe, like build up the stars, the planets, or maybe on the earth we have a car, we have a plane, we have a boat. So what kind of substance that can build such a thing in a universe? So the answer is we will know in here, okay? So in 1661, the scientist's name is Robert Boyle. It is found that the entire universe are made up by some basic substance, and it's called as the element. So as you can see in the beginning, our topic is about elements. So yeah, this is the element. So the element is a basic substance that can made up the universe, okay? So that's the first concept for all of you. So if you guys ever heard about elements, I think you guys only know the element from maybe a cartoon, like the Avatar, like there are some element like fire, water, earth, wind, something like that. So that's not the element for the scientific purpose. So this is the elements according to the scientific explanation, okay? And the second concept, in 1803, John Dalton, the scientist, suggests that each element was composed of its own kind of particle, which he called as an atoms. So the entire universe are made up by some element. But the element also has its own kind of particle, and the particle itself is called as an atoms. And the atoms itself is the smallest particle of matter that still have chemical properties. So there are elements and there are atoms. So elements are built the entire universe, and there is an atom, so the atom is built the element. Okay, so please remember that concept. So the definition can be extended to include the fact that each element is made up of only one kind of atoms. Okay, so this is very easy for all of you because I said it again, this is the fundamental, so you need to understand about this concept. Okay, so I think it's enough for the explanation about the elements and also atoms, and we go next to the example of the elements. Okay, previously we learned about the explanation about what is the element, what is an atom. So here we have a real example of the element. The first one is gold. Okay, so the gold is an element. So the gold element are only made up by one kind of atoms. So the only one kind of atom is gold. So if we look closely to the gold here, so if we look closely, there are no other atoms rather than gold atom itself. It is the same as a carbon element. If we look more closely here in the carbon atoms, in the carbon elements, we will not see any other atoms rather than carbon atoms. So it is the same as iron also. The iron are only made up by only one kind of atoms, and the atoms itself, it is called as iron atoms. Why I said look more closely? Because the definition before here, so the atoms are the smallest particle. So it means that we cannot see atoms by naked eyes. So we need some equipment, or the equipment name is an electron microscope. So with electron microscope, we can see the atoms by naked eyes. So of course, we need a help from the microscope, okay? And next, we have type of elements. So yeah, maybe you guys can see here, there are two types of the elements. So the first one is metal element, and the second is non-metal element. For the metal element here, we have iron, and for the non-metal, we have a liquid nitrogen. Okay, so in here we have iron and also nitrogen. And each of type of the elements, like metal and non-metal, each of the types have its own characteristic. So we will see in here for the characteristic. So we go to the characteristic. For the first one, for the first properties, the first one is about the physical state at room temperature. For the metal element, it is usually solid, and for the non-metal element, it can be solid, liquid, or a gas. Okay, and for the melting point, for the metal element, it is usually high, and for the non-metal is low. It is the same as boiling point. For the metal is high, and for the non-metal is very low. So if you want to melt, or if you want to boil a metal element, you need like 1000 degrees of Celsius to melt the only one kind of metal. So it's very high, you know. And for the non-metal, the temperature to melt or to boil is usually low. Okay, it can be in minus degree of Celsius. Okay, and the last one is about the conductivity. So both for the thermal and electrical, the metal has a good conductivity. So for the example before, like the iron, so the iron has a good thermal and electrical conductivity. And for the non-metal, the example is nitrogen. So the thermal and electrical conductivity is very poor, okay? So that's for the explanation about the differences between metal and non-metal element. And in here, we have a distribution of metal and non-metal in periodic table. Because I think you don't know like what kind of metal element and what kind of non-metal element. So because in the previous, I just give you like a 3 example, or maybe 4 example. There are gold, and then iron, and then nitrogen, something like that. So in here, I want to explain to you guys. So what is the distribution of metal and non-metal in periodic table? So because elements is too many, and the chemists use a symbol to label the element. So to identify the element, the scientists use a symbol to represent each of the element. And each element is put to the periodic table. So the scientists give the symbol to the element and then put it to the periodic table. And the symbol consists of 1, 2, or 3 letters. Where the several elements have the same initial letter, a second letter of the name or subsequent letter is added. So there are a lot of elements that have the same initial letter, such as we can see here, C in carbon, Ca in calcium, and Cl for chlorine. So yeah, the first name is the same, right? It is C. for the initial letter. But if the initial letter is the same, so you can, the scientists add the second letter, such as A and also L. Okay, and also there are some element that seems to have no relationship to the name of the element. For the example, an A for sodium and Pb for lead. As you can see here, for the C, it is very similar with the elements itself. So C stands for carbon, Ca for calcium, Cl for chlorine, because it is the same as its element. C, because the carbon, the first letter of carbon is C, Ca for calcium because the first two letters of calcium is Ca, and chlorine also because the first and the third letter is C and L, so the symbol is Cl. But there are some element that seems doesn't have any relationship between the symbol and also the elements, because the elements, it is come from the Latin name. Okay, after we learn about the atoms, the elements, so now we will learn about the molecules. So what is the molecules? So the molecule is when the atoms of some elements are joined together in a small group. Okay. So for the example, the atoms of the element hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine are each joined in pairs, and they are known as the atomic elements. So the example is here. Okay, as the explanation before, this is the explanation. The atoms of some elements are joined together in a small group. The atoms of some element. Please keep remember that. The atoms of some element. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is the example for the first is the hydrogen. So the hydrogen is made up by the atoms of the element of hydrogen. So the atoms of hydrogen will bond together like two of hydrogen atoms. And also for the nitrogen also, it's two atoms like bond together. Like, yeah, all of the element here is bond together with its own atoms. Hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and also iodine. And the last is about compounds. After we learn about atoms, after we learn about the elements, after we learn about the molecules, now we will learn about the compounds, okay? So what is the compounds? So the compounds are pure substance which are formed when two or more elements chemically combine together. Please see the keyword here. It is formed when two or more elements chemically combine together. And water is the water is the example of the compounds. So as you can see here in the figure here, so the hydrogen is a pure element, oxygen also a pure element. So this is a water. So the water is H2O. So you can see here, this is hydrogen and this is the oxygen element. So they combine together become water. So the water consists of two elements that chemically combine together. It is different with the molecule, because molecule, it is bound together with its own kind of atoms or its own kind of elements. But for the compounds, it is formed when two different elements that chemically combine together. So this is the water here. So this is represent the atoms of the oxygen and also the hydrogen itself, and it will become a water, or we also call it as H2O. Okay, and now before I end the class, I have the summary of the lesson in case you guys missed the the fundamental or the key of the explanation. So the first one is about the elements. So the elements itself is a basic substance that made up the entire universe, okay? And the second one, we have the concept of the atoms. So what is the atoms? So the atoms is the smallest particle of matter that still have chemical properties. And the atoms itself, the elements itself, it is composed by its own kind of particle. And the particle itself, it is called as an atoms. And the atoms is very small. So we cannot see the atoms by the naked eyes. So we need the help of the electron microscope to see the atoms. Okay, the next is the types of the elements. So we have two types of the elements. The first one is metal and the second one is non-metal. And each type of the element has its own characteristic. Okay, and all elements are listed on the periodic table. So the scientists already found around 118 elements. So all of the elements are listed in the periodic table to be more easier to it can be more easier for us to understand about each element because it is put in the list, so we can see directly, and it's very easy to understand. Okay, and next is about the concept of the molecules. So when the atoms of some elements are joined together in a small group, it is called as molecules. And the last one is about the compounds. So the compound is when two or more elements chemically combine together. Okay, so the differences between molecules and also compounds is that the molecule is only contained of the atoms of some elements, because the atoms is the same element, so it will bond together with the same atoms in the element. For the example, hydrogen. So hydrogen atom and the hydrogen atom are bind together. And it is different with the compounds because it is two or more elements that chemically combine together. So the example is water, because water is H2O. It consists of hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms, so it is called as a compounds because there are two elements that chemically combine together. Okay? And yeah, maybe that's all for the lesson. So for now, I have some exercise for all of you in case you want to know how far you're understanding about this concept. So please scan this QR code, and this QR code will directly lead you to the exercise. Okay, so maybe that's all for the topic today, and yeah, see you next time. Bye bye.